Hello, and welcome to Build Back Liberal. This series explores how we can develop a progressive centre-left agenda for the Liberal Democrats going forwards. Today, I am delighted to be joined by the former Minister for Equalities, Lynne Featherstone. Hello.
Hello.
For the likely very small number of people watching this who don't know your career inside out, could you introduce yourself and sort of explain, if someone didn't know you, who would you say you are?
Well, I'd say I was an accidental politician in that I didn't get to Parliament until I was 53 years old, and I'd had a 20-year career as a designer, graphic designer with my own small company. But I'd done a lot of voluntary work, and I got to the point where I felt my business was just improving someone's bottom line. And it wasn't changing the world. You know, it was a great profession. I love being a designer. I'm very designery. But it wasn't doing what I wanted. And when I was one of the places, I was a volunteer on a really serious ward in the Royal Free Hospital. And people were dying, and I would hold their hands if they didn't have a relative. And I looked around the rooms, and all the machine-made stuff had a little plaque saying they'd be donated by someone related to the person who was dying of that disease. And the nurses had no time to plump people's pillows. And I remember thinking to myself, my goodness, the NHS would collapse if it wasn't for volunteers and, you know, donations. And we need to change this, change the world. So I joined the Liberal Democrats, which is probably not, you know, you don't ever join the Lib Dems and think it's a career. I just joined because I was so frustrated with everything. And Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister, and I had a 2-year-old and a 7-year-old at the time. And she was creating this me society. And although there was no such thing as society. Anyway, so I joined, and I think it's been have mouth will travel, really. And I had a rather rapid rise. I became the leader of the first ever Lib Dem Group on Haringey Council. We were 26,000 behind Labour at the general election with a Tory in between. We didn't have any wards in the borough. We weren't even second in any ward. We were third or fourth. So luckily I knew so little about politics, that didn't put me off. And this breakthrough group of 3 women, Lib Dems, first group on Haringey ever, and we got as far as 27 councillors. But 2 years into that, I was elected to the London Assembly when it was set up alongside Ken Livingstone, etc., who I really liked before I knew him and really hated him after I knew him. That's a long story. And then I got elected to Parliament 5 years later, and when it was the coalition, I was a minister for all 5 years of the coalition. So that was 3 years at the Home Office and Equalities Minister, and 2 years in the Department for International Development. And then I lost my seat, like everyone did at the end of the coalition. And Nick Clegg texted me and said, "Oi, Lynn, I need you in the Lords," and that's where I now am.
So when your time as a minister, what do you think was your biggest achievement?
I think everyone would say same-sex marriage, which wasn't in the manifesto, wasn't in the coalition agreement, but I just thought to myself, what can I do with my moment in the sun? How many times in history will we have a Liberal Democrat equalities minister? And to me, civil partnerships were a fantastic move forward by the Labour Party, but it wasn't equality. And it's always been an equal rights issue. And I've always felt that created a kind of 2-tier, you know, marriage for straights and civil partnerships for gays. And now we have both for both. So that's a bit of business done. But yeah, no, people love that. And for me, it's incredibly emotional because I will go to places and some young man or woman will come up to me and say, "Thank you for what you did." And then we both burst into tears because it's like, how could that not have been the case? How could that discrimination have been there and now it's gone? You know, there's enough other things that to worry you without that.
I think there are many areas of policy where you can have a positive impact on people's lives, but there are very few where you can give someone the happiest day of their life. And I think that's probably why it's just so impactful in that way.
It's a lovely thing to have done. And, you know, you take a lot of shit in politics. I have to say, over my 20 years in elected politics, it's unrelenting work, because as a Liberal Democrat, there isn't a safe seat. You have to work your bottom off all the time. And people are not always nice to you, although I don't understand why not. And the public exposure and the sort of hate-filled stuff that goes on. I had so many death threats when I was doing same-sex marriage, and people saying I was spawn of the devil and all of those kind of things. But that thing makes me say it was really all worth it. That and all the people you help, and it's magical to think that happened. I look back and I think, how did I do that? I must have been mad. I mean, in the sense that I didn't know enough about being in government to know that you're meant to just do what's in the manifesto.
Well, apparently the person behind it, a certain Baroness Featherstone, wrote a book outlining exactly how she did it. So if anybody wants to know, you can go and buy the book.
I wrote the book, Equal Ever After, because I was so fed up with David Cameron trying to say it was him. I mean, obviously he supported it, and Labour members voted for it, and Stonewall and Pink News and everyone worked on it, but it wasn't them. It was blooming well me, just thinking of it and asking my poor private secretary when I came in to probably my third morning in government, saying, I want to do same-sex marriage. What do I need to do? How do I do it? Well, Minister, he said, well, Minister, you have to write some words and then you have to send them in to the Home Secretary, who was Theresa May, and she has to approve them. But whatever else you think of her, she did, and she backed me all the way. So,
how did you come to be involved in Build Back Better, and why do you think this was such an important piece of work?
Well, firstly, they asked me. Layla asked me. And when she laid out the rationale that we needed to literally build back better, I couldn't have agreed more. It's been a long time since we've had a radical think about the way things are. And I think the pandemic just was a sort of opportunity to say, let's not just do the same. Let's not go back to the old normal. Let's create a new normal. And I think the scales really fell from people's eyes when they were locked down and miserable in what really mattered to them. You know, going to the local shopping parade wasn't what mattered. It was people, the people they love, having company and breathing fresh air and not having this constant driving. Well, you know, if you work in the city in London, you know, the commute in and out, and you don't really think about it. It's just your life. But when it stopped, it was peaceful. It was quiet. It was a shame there was a pandemic in the background, because that made you a bit anxious. But it gave you an opportunity to see how life might be different. And what could we do? What were the essential things we could do that would mean that we kept the best of what we'd learned in the pandemic and applied it to life after the pandemic?
So your chapter, and you're sort of like the you provide sort of the introduction to the sort of wider section on inequality. Just sort of explain sort of what that section was particularly about and what you were trying to get across there.
Well, my chapter was on equality, and I think people often just immediately think it's about being straight or gay or trans or women or disabled or, you know, whatever. They don't really... economic equality doesn't usually come in the same breath as the rest, but they're all interrelated and intersectional as well. So the chapter comprised a number of things. There was on income equality, there's a one piece on universal basic income, and that's now party policy. At the last conference that was voted through. So it began a movement and people could identify with it. And although it was in Layla's pamphlet, it was very soon adopted by the party and by Ed, who is our leader. There's a chapter saying it's a natural home for Black and ethnically diverse people. I'm not a chapter, a part of the chapter. And arguing, and I'm very sympathetic to this argument that, you know, you always assume, for example, that people who are from Black or ethnically diverse places will automatically join Labour if they're poor and join the Conservatives if they're rich. And they skip us. But this was arguing that actually, if you think about it, do you always follow your parents? You know, your parents may have come here, as my grandparents did from Russia, and their children may have completely different ideas about the world. I mean, I would do the exact opposite of what my mother wanted. So I think there's an assumption that there is a liberation of freedom in not being an either or, and actually having room to be a different person with a different way of thinking. There was a piece on the double burden that there is for women, and I mean, that's well-trodden path, in fact. And then Helen Belcher wrote a section on dignity, not discrimination, which deals with a whole range of issues around inequality and how, if you are from those communities, and if you are from one of the equality strands, how that intersects in terms economically, because on majority, not everybody, but there is a correlation between those and deprivation. And therefore we needed to change our thinking. And these were people theories on how one might approach it, you know, not just raising the issue, but offering a solution. And one point Helen Belcher made, which I thought was very good, well, 2 points actually. One was that finance, even if you had the basic universal income, which would help security and confidence, it doesn't necessarily eradicate discrimination itself. So you needed a different set of policies around that, but there was a great intersectionality there. Oh, and my bit, sorry.
Yes.
And the thesis I introduce in my own piece that introduces the chapter is that if we want to build back better, we need to have a different way of looking at life. So my remedy is that we judge our life and our world by our well-being, and that just examining GDP is not really enough. It's not full enough. I mean, interestingly, Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand has introduced well-being as a metric of measure of how well a policy is doing. And I think it's absolutely requisite that we do that. I think that's how you judge if something's working, because otherwise it's the same old, same old. I also think we should fund public services much better. And, I would raise tax, and I would raise it not just for rich people. I think this constant hit on the wealthy doesn't really answer the question. If it solved everything, it would be fine. But even if you took their money, it wouldn't be enough. So I think taxation has to be thought about and raised across the board. And, I love the Scandinavian countries' approach to public services. I think it's much better. And it also means that you begin to address one of our long-standing issues, which is the gap between the rich and the poor. And it's very difficult. You can't just take someone's house away from them because they were lucky to buy one whenever it was a good time to buy, or their family circumstances. But you can make sure that going forward, that you create a much more even playing field. And gradually over time, that will right the wrongs of the past, or the privileges of the past, which, exist.
The first interview I did for the series was with Paul Neblett, who contributed as well to your section. And one thing we touched on is looking back at the spirit level, which had been written about a decade ago now, and showed how economic inequality is bad not just for people who are at the poor end of it, but actually for everybody, because it generates a sense of insecurity and dependence on your income that really actually undermines your mental well-being at all times. Even if you're affluent, the price of failure in life is that much higher if you don't have a strong safety net, and that is something that induces anxiety in everybody.
That's absolutely correct. And the other thing is that you would feel better, people would feel better if they were more equal. I think for people who are fortunate, I'm fortunate, I've spent my life trying to make up for being fortunate. I don't feel good about the fact that, my career and stuff was, it all happened as you would want it to. But, for a lot of people, that's why they start doing, they go into politics or they go into philanthropy or whatever, because it's not right to be better or so much better off than people who are suffering. And I think if you could create that equal world, everyone would be better right across the spectrum.
One thing you really emphasize or explore in your section is about how what the pandemic has revealed about inequality. Could you talk about that particularly? What do you feel that we are seeing in the pandemic, that is how that is being a mirror to our society in this?
What we're seeing is how, particularly economic inequality, and that is mirrored by often by those who are economically challenged, are in jobs that are on the front line, whether you're black or an ethnic minority or a woman. Those industries have been on the front line and therefore have been more affected, more infected, and have had to deal with carrying on. I can work from home. I can work on Zoom. I can vote in the Lords on Zoom. Whoever thought that could happen? But lots of people have to still go out to work, and they don't get paid much for it, and they're on the front line, and they catch diseases, and they don't have the money to insulate themselves in any way from what is happening. So I think it has been very stark, and you've seen it in death. It's not just obviously the food shortages and the need to support people. I think some of the support packages that were there have been good, but they're not forever. But people have been forced into situations that are dangerous, whereas if you're more comfortable, that's not been your situation. So I think it has starkly put into relief the difference for people who have no money, for people who are women on the front line, often in the care homes and the hospitals, and the supermarkets, and the bus drivers, the train drivers. All of these people who've been providing the most important public services, the health workers, the carers, have been exposed to the virus, don't have the wherewithal to insulate themselves against the virus, and have no means and lose their jobs. And so we need to think very carefully about levelling the playing field. And I think it's absolutely critical, but whether the Conservatives have noticed, I'm not sure.
I think something that's was really revealing in the lockdown phase was about how there was a sense of, well, everyone can just go home, stay home, and that was definitely the right thing to do from a health standpoint. But that the reality of that was very different for different groups in society. So you have people at the top end who have large homes with large gardens and an ability to carry on large parts of their life because they can work from home fine. Then you have perhaps someone like myself, who I have been very lucky in that I've been able to work from home, I've been able to maintain my job. but that means I live, work, entertain myself in my bedroom. That is my world. And it is not. It is, it's not the smallest, but it is a very contained world. And then you have people who are at the particularly vulnerable, who've lost their jobs, so lost a lot of their interaction with people. Sometimes they might live in a high-rise building where they have no communal, no green space. Their world was became even smaller, even more constrained, and there was, I think, a very limited recognition of what that reality meant to people, as the government was implementing the policy, and a sort of, I feel, lack of sympathy for that reality.
Absolutely, and a lack of understanding. And in fact, the community stepped forward to actually address and brought out some of the best in communities, because, and all communities, where people have got together in every street to make sure that the people who can't in their street have some food, go out and buy, deliver, give, the local food banks, the online communities that sprang up in your area or next door or whatever they're called. And people filled or tried to fill some of the gaps that should really have been safety netted by the government, but were not. And that remains the case as we look like we're going into another lockdown.
I think one thing that's also, and I touched on this in the last conversation I had with Tom King, which is that people's security economically, we've talked there. There's been lots of talk about a gig economy and that for a number of years now, but that there was that even with the furlough scheme and a range of government projects, there were lots of people who found themselves falling through cracks. People who had productive careers, but I think particularly people in I have friends who work in the West End in London in the live entertainment industry, most of whom are contractors, or have take roles, who suddenly find that they had a perfectly good career, but then that career doesn't exist right at this moment, and they're in a very precarious situation. And I think it's really, again, just revealing of the lack of security for people that our current economic model has provided. That it could have been a pandemic, but it could have been something else, and and many other things in people's lives that disrupt that, and we really have a real problem with our safety net.
I think that's the idea, in a sense, behind the universal basic income, is that it will provide a level of security, but the level at which even we are suggesting is not really enough. But it would be a start to that basic security. And as I said, we need to make sure that the public services and the safety nets are better funded by taxes, general taxation, so that we can afford to be more generous, and gradually over time that will level things, will spirit level them, I hope. Because you want to be a happy country. You don't want to be that different to everyone else. And that's the sort of world you prefer to live in. And you get a bit of it from the spirit of people, but the actual hard reality of people's lives, as you pointed out, I could not help thinking all the way through the pandemic, what would I have done? I was a single parent as of the ages of 7 and 12, my kids, when I became a single parent. But what would I have done as a single parent in a tower block with two young, even younger children, stuck in there day in, day out? Just the level of unfairness and mental damage, and the feeling of, how do I ever change it? How do I get out of this situation? That's what we need to provide. And childcare is a big issue around income equality, because you actually need a national childcare program better than we have, so that that isn't an issue for people to get out and earn a living. People don't want to live off the state. They'd rather get out of the house. I'm sure I went into politics to get away from my children, but you know what I mean? It gives you a positivity to life if you have, you know, both. If you're lucky enough to have children, but you do need something to keep your sanity as well.
So, as you said, the party has now adopted UBI as a policy, which I'm obviously very thrilled about. But we still have quite a big open question about what we're trying to achieve with UBI, thinking about what kind of level it should be set at, what we're hoping for from this policy. Do you have any sense about where you think that level should be set, or what do you think a successful UBI would achieve and would look like?
It needs to be at a level that can give people enough security that they don't spend their life worrying about where their next meal is going to come from, whether they can pay an electricity bill. You know, these very basic things should be in a, you know, what are we, the 5th or 6th richest economy in the world? These should be things that we long to pay our tax for. I want to live in a society where those who haven't had good fortune are treated like valuable human beings who should be supported, not like they're some kind of scroungers. You know, that's just the worst thing. You know, in anything there will be people who play the system, but the vast majority of people are decent. They just want to grow their families, live happily, be nice to people, work if they can work. They're not out to get state benefits. This gives people a sense of pride in themselves, and we should change our attitude towards it. I mean, it should be enough that this is what people want everyone to have as a basic standard of living, so that they don't have to be scared and they don't have to worry. And we should be proud of that as a society. That's what we want to create. Not say, I'm all right, Jack, and therefore I don't have to pay any more. We should pay more.
So, Liberal Democrats are in government for 5 years, and it's now 5 years since that time where we're not the ones setting the agenda on equalities policy. What do you think has happened in sort of the direction in that space, and why would it be better for the Liberal Democrats to be moving in that area for going forwards? Where do you think is the battlefield around that now?
Well, I think it's better for Liberal Democrats to be in government, full stop. You know, I just think we bring a sense of decency, moderation, liberation. And, you know, I joined the party probably like lots of members because of not wanting anyone to be stuck in ignorance, poverty, or conformity. And we have all of those things, sadly, under a Conservative government who seem to want people to be stuck and not really get on in life. I think Conservatives have a very different attitude. I think, obviously, I work closely in coalition, and you know, I don't dislike Conservatives. You know, they don't think like me, but I'm a liberal, so I like the fact that people think differently to each other. However, they're not able to be modern. You know, if you want to I regard sort of the thinking and the ambition in Scandinavia, which doesn't always work and is not perfect, but at least the aspiration is for people to live decent lives, free in what they do, etc., etc. And the Conservatives just have a different model. And I don't know where or why they think that works, because it's continually shown to them that it doesn't work, other than if you're lucky enough to hit the right job, get the right salary, be born to the right parents. You know, it's much tougher. And they have tried in recent years to become less of the nasty party. I mean, obviously, with Theresa May as my boss, I mean, she definitely had made a huge change in her own thinking around, particularly around things like same-sex marriage and those kind of issues. And she was very strong on things like violence against women, and supported me in my FGM campaign, and so on and so forth. But basically, they somehow seem to think that there's a vast swathe of our population who somehow deserve to be poor. And there's just something really basic in that attitude. It's not all conservatives, but I think there's a lack of understanding about what it's like to be born with your opportunities in life limited before you even enter the world. And I don't think they really get that, because that is not the experience of a lot of people who are in the Conservative government and or in the Conservative Party. I think it's interesting now they've been elected in the Red Wall constituencies that they will see a lot more of life, not as you get in Kensington or I don't know. I mean, they're not blind. Any MP has a range of constituents, but the basic level of everydayness of what poverty and lack of privilege and any of the equalities issues that can pin you down in one way or another, they don't somehow genuinely believe that it's not somebody's own fault that they're not where they are.
I think that's an interesting observation, in that I was worried before 2019 that what the Conservatives were really doing was refreshing their parliamentary party to better reflect, firstly, to remove any residual remainers within their parliamentary party, to move towards this more nationalist right set. But because they won so many seats in the north of England, they've ended up with this group of MPs who are now actually are starting to ask questions of the government about, hang on, where's all this money that was promised for these the communities that we've been elected to serve? And maybe, I say with very limited optimism, that will be a positive impact on the Conservative Party to a limited extent.
The thing about that result from these Red Wall, from what they call the Red Wall, is that whatever else Conservatives are or are not, they are ruthless about winning elections. And therefore, whether it's for the right reason or the wrong reason, it may well be that they level up for the wrong reason, but with the right outcome. And that would be fine by me. I mean, I would like to think that even if it's for electoral gain, they do the right thing. And because their MPs from those areas will bring a different perspective to the Conservative Party than they've ever had before. And so politics works in mysterious ways. But they're very different in their thought processes as to why people end up where they are. Of course, there are opportunities and there is social mobility for some. And obviously hard work does bring reward and all of that, but hard work can often just go on for a lifetime with no reward, just survival. And I think that's where their lack of understanding rests. I just want a different world. I think we have an opportunity to do it differently. And that's why, Build Back Better, which has now been taken up as a slogan by everybody, is absolutely the right approach. It's sort of, okay, we've all paused, we've all thought, we understand just going on the way we've been going on isn't good enough anymore. So let's change it. We can actually change the way our world works.
It would be slightly strange to ignore the fact that we're recording this on the 31st of October, so we're 3 days out from the US election, which is probably the biggest single political event in the world at this right now. Without going into a rabbit hole, I've been asking each person I've been interviewing in this series to think of one thought, one idea, one lesson about what's going on over there that we should be taking away from that as Liberal Democrats or as just Forward Britain. What something you've seen that you think is particularly interesting?
Okay. Can I have 3? very quickly.
I have no ability to say no to you, so by all means.
Well, I think one of the very interesting things, and we can learn from Trump, which there's not much you can learn from Trump that's good, to be frank. I mean, he is the most, well, but he's kind of kept some of his promises. They may have been promises that I didn't like, but I think that is a lesson in terms of people supporting a politician, a leader, in that they feel they weren't lied to. I mean, he's lived up to his reputation. I think he's also shown that you can be radical. He may be radical in the wrong direction, but he's radical, and you can make deep change. But the most important lesson, I think, that I've learned from the American election is that when money is the only arbiter of who can run for president, you end up with a Trump or even a Biden. I mean, Biden is a decent man, but to think that America ended up with these two as their final competition is down to the way politics is done. And if you can buy power, that's just wrong. There are so many brilliant people in America who could do so brilliantly for the country, but who will never, ever have the chance of leading their country.
Thank you very much, Lynne. This has been a wonderful and delight for me. And,
delight for me too.
Thank you for listening to Build Back Liberal. Please comment below with any questions you may have or any thoughts for the future of the series. Take care and stay safe.